Would you believe a mother who lost her child risked her life to save a Bigfoot family during the worst drought in history? A legendary creature once collapsed right in front of her, and its first act was to shield its child from the sun. In the late 1990s, during the harshest drought Eagle Ridge, Montana had ever known, one woman came face to face with a creature the world believes is only a myth. The ground was cracked, rivers bone dry, and under the scorching cliffs of Limestone Bluff, a mother Bigfoot lay dying, shielding her newborns with the last strength in her body. Marion Larkin, 41, a quiet librarian who'd once lost her own daughter in a snowstorm accident, stumbled upon them and, against every law of the wild, chose to stay. When the mother beast raised her claws to defend her young, Marion didn't run. She simply whispered, "I bring only water." And the unthinkable happened. The creature lowered her hand and let a human in. What followed was a sacred 21-day bond of milk bottles once meant for Marion's child, of healing wounds both seen and unseen, and of trust blooming where fear once ruled. Until one day, the skies finally wept, and it was time to say goodbye. But 2 years later, across an autumn ridge, Marion saw a familiar shape. A mother Bigfoot, strong and alive, leading 2 young ones through the forest, from hundreds of meters away. She turned, and for 3 long seconds, held Marion's gaze. Not as a beast, but as a soul, remembering the woman who believed in her when the world would not. Sometimes the wild heals in ways we can never predict. Now, dear viewer, I wonder, where in the world are you watching from? What's your name, kind soul? And how far could a story like this travel if you helped share it? If this touched your heart, tap like and subscribe. Let's build a community that believes Bigfoot isn't just a myth. She might just be a mother. The summer would not end. Not this one. Not here. Eagle Ridge, a town you'd miss if you blinked too long driving Highway 287, sat quietly at the edge of the limestone wilderness, like it had always been waiting for something terrible to happen. By August, the land had turned brittle. For 76 straight days, not a single drop fell from the wide white sky. The lake that once held rowboats and bullfrogs had collapsed into a cracked mud pan, broken into a mosaic of curling, sun-baked earth. The fields, once lush with yellow wheat and dandelions, now smoked quietly in the breeze. The grass burnt to the root, and the air smelled like something had died long ago, but was still somehow smoldering. And inside a small weather-beaten cabin, tucked between 2 old ponderosa pines and a half-fallen fence, Marion Larkin sat with her back to the world. 41 years old, thin-shouldered. Her hands looked younger than her face, always busy but careful, like they were still waiting for someone small to need them again. She lived alone, and had for nearly a decade. Each morning she walked 2 miles into town and shelved returned paperbacks at the public library, a few hours at a time. She liked the quiet there. No questions, no unexpected laughter, just the smell of old glue and pages turning like whispers. But her real work began at home. Locals knew her cabin as a kind of in-between place, where wounded animals were left in cardboard boxes or wool blankets on her porch. A raccoon with a broken paw, a hawk that flew into a window, a fawn that lost its mother. Marion never asked who brought them. She just opened the door, knelt down, and began the slow work of giving them another chance. Some people said she had a gift. Others just said she couldn't let go. But Marion didn't believe in either. Outside, the wind moved like something searching. The trees rattled low, dry like bones. Each sound scraped against the inside of her chest, stirring things she thought she'd buried. That summer's silence wasn't peaceful. It was cruel, unrelenting, and under it all, her memory still whispered through every creak of the floorboards. The memory of a child's laugh echoing in the mountains, the sound of small hands clapping in the back seat, then the rain, The road slick, the curve too fast, the screams too sudden, the silence that followed too complete. It had been 1987, a storm that came out of nowhere, a winding descent down Grizzly Pass, a husband's grip on the wheel, white-knuckled, a daughter's pink sneaker pressed against the back of Marion's seat, and then steel, glass, the crunch of trees snapping like bones. Her body found in the wreckage 2 hours later, ribs broken, vision blurred, the copper taste of blood in her mouth, and faint. Beneath the wreckage and the smoke, the last thing she ever heard from her daughter. "Mommy?" Since then, the rain had always felt like a lie. It never washed anything away. Now, 13 years later, the sun refused to leave. That evening, just before dark settled in, Marion stepped outside with a bowl of water for a wounded kestrel she was nursing. The bird blinked slowly, perched on the low rail, feathers wilted but alive. As she refilled the bowl, a sound reached her ears, sharp, distant, and wrong. She froze. It didn't sound like a bear. She'd heard bears, low, wet bellows from deep in the gullet. This wasn't that. And it wasn't a mountain lion either. Those had a certain shrillness, like screaming trapped inside fur. This was different. It was deep and ragged, like something enormous gasping through a throat full of ash. It echoed from the direction of the Limestone Bluff, bouncing down the ridgeline in a broken rhythm. It was the sound of something trying not to die. She stood there, one hand clenched around the empty water pitcher, breath caught halfway between her ribs and her mouth. Her first instinct was to pretend she hadn't heard it, to go back inside, draw the curtains, turn the radio to static. But something in her chest, something older than fear, rooted her there. And then she moved. She followed the sound the next morning. The sun hadn't fully risen, just a pale orange cut along the hills when Marion packed her canvas satchel with a small first aid kit, a battered thermos of water, and the one thing she hadn't touched in years, her daughter's old baby bottle. It was still in the cupboard, tucked behind a jar of forgotten cloves and a cracked teacup. Her fingers trembled as she washed it clean. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Eagle Ridge wasn't the sort of town that asked questions. Not anymore. The path toward Limestone Bluff was steep in parts and covered in loose shale, but she moved like someone who had walked it in dreams. Around her, the forest barely breathed. Trees leaned like silent witnesses. A single raven watched her from the high limbs, head cocked, silent. Then the prints appeared. The first one was wide, at least twice the width of her boot, and sunk nearly an inch into the cracked soil. She crouched beside it, brushing away dust. 5 toes, human-like but monstrous in scale. The second print was deeper, angled, like the creature had stumbled. Something heavy, injured. She kept walking. The trail of prints led her higher up the ridge, toward a cluster of limestone boulders that jutted out like broken teeth. And then she saw it. A shadow slumped beneath a stone ledge, half concealed by brush and shade. Not a bear, not anything she had ever seen. A mass of fur, long and matted, draped over limbs too thick to be anything but powerful. And beside it, nestled beneath one massive arm, were 2 smaller shapes, breathing, trembling, making the faintest of sounds. They were babies. The mother lay motionless, ribs rising just enough to betray life. Her lips were cracked, her tongue dry and gray at the edges. A dark bruise bloomed across her side, a jagged wound ringed in old blood and flies. The heat pressed down from above. One of the babies whimpered, a soft rasp barely louder than wind through pine. Then came the vultures, circling first, dipping lower. One landed 10 yards away, head cocked, eyes gleaming. Marion stood up fast, waving her arms, yelling without words. The bird lifted, wings beating against the hot air. That's when the creature stirred. The mother's eyes opened, deep set, dark, rimmed with red. Her head turned, her body tensed, and then she rose, slow and unsteady, growling low through broken teeth. One arm swept her children behind her, the other raised, claws curved and black, catching the light. She bared her teeth, stumbled a step forward. Marion did not run. She sank to her knees, hands open, palms up. No fear in her voice, just something old and hollow and true. "I lost my child too," she whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The wind stilled. For a moment, the world hung in silence, as if waiting for permission to exhale. The mother froze, breath shallow. Her raised arm quivered mid-air. Then, inch by inch, she lowered it. Her eyes remained locked on Marion's. She shifted slightly, pulling her arm away from the two small ones. An invitation. Marion moved slowly, reaching into her bag. She pulled out the thermos, unscrewed the cap. Water sloshed gently as she poured it into the baby bottle, then held it out, arms extended, not daring to inch closer. The mother stared. Then, with effort, she leaned forward, only enough to let her mouth touch the edge of the bottle. The water disappeared in seconds. Her throat worked frantically. Water spilled from the corners of her mouth, ran down her chin, soaked the dust below. She drank like someone being pulled back from the edge, and Marion just watched, heart pounding not with fear, but recognition, the kind that lives in the bones of those who have lost and still choose to reach out anyway. Night fell slow and heavy. She returned to her cabin under the blue weight of stars, her boots caked in dust, and the ghost of something wild pacing behind her ribs. She sat beside the old cedar box that once held her daughter's toys. Her fingers found the worn wooden lid. She didn't open it, just rested her hand there. Outside, the wind whispered again, but this time, it didn't sound quite so lonely. Inside, Marion made a decision she hadn't expected. At first light tomorrow, she would return, not out of curiosity, not even out of duty, but because something in her had started breathing again, and she couldn't bear the thought of it falling silent. Morning came slow, pressing gold light through the haze like honey over dry land. Marion stood by the door of her cabin before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, laces tied tight, satchel slung over her shoulder. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. No one waited for her return. The heat was already crawling up from the ground, clinging to her like breath. She walked east, the same direction as the sound that had haunted her sleep. Each step took her farther from the known, yet somehow closer to something she couldn't name. The land around her remained still, as if the forest itself had paused to watch. This time, she came prepared, not just with supplies, but with intent. In the worn canvas bag bouncing gently against her hip were three things: a field medical kit, a clean bottle of water, and her daughter's old baby bottle. It had taken her an hour to get the sour smell out the night before, washing and rinsing until it gleamed like new. The act of cleaning it, hands steady, heart unsteady, had felt like brushing the dust off a part of herself she hadn't touched in years. By the time she reached the foot of Limestone Bluff, the shadows were shifting across the stone like slow smoke. The footprints from the day before were still there, some blurred at the edges, others sharp and deep. One of them had a smear of dark red through it. She followed. Up ahead, beneath a curve in the stone, where a shelf of rock jutted just enough to catch shade, she found them again. The mother hadn't moved far. Her body lay curled against the stone, limbs slack, mouth parted, breath dragging through her throat like dry fabric torn too many times. But it was the arms, those great bark-thick limbs, that caught Marion's eye. One of them was lifted, barely, casting shade over the two small shapes beneath her. The babies hadn't moved. Their fur was damp at the edges, not from rain, but from the slow leak of life leaving. One of them shifted weakly, pressing its face into its sibling's back. Marion froze, watching. The way the mother had stretched herself out, chest to the sun, back to the stone, using her body as a barrier between the heat and her children. She knew this posture. She knew it in her bones. Mothers did not sleep like that unless there was no other choice. Marion dropped to her knees. She spoke nothing, just moved, slow and careful, like the air might shatter if she breathed too hard. She uncapped the thermos and poured the water into the baby bottle, her fingers trembling slightly. The scent of sweat and earth hung thick in the pocket of shade. She crawled forward, holding the bottle out, the plastic warm in her palm. The bigger of the two babies stirred, nose twitching. Tiny fingers reached, clumsy, uncertain, then brushed against her wrist. The contact was feather-light, but it rocked her backward in time to a crib with chipped paint and the sound of lullabies sung half asleep. Marion blinked hard and kept her hand steady. She tilted the bottle gently, letting a few drops fall onto the tiny tongue now searching. The baby sucked weakly. The second one, smaller, turned its face toward the smell. Marion switched hands and brought the bottle to its mouth, giving them each time to drink. They were so light, so quiet. Above them, the mother did not stir. But something changed, a shift in the air, subtle but immediate. Marion looked up and saw one of the vultures perched again, not circling now, but grounded. Its head turned, beady eyes watching with that awful patience that only carrion creatures possess. Another bird dropped lower overhead, wings outstretched. She stood abruptly, waving her arms, shouting hoarsely into the emptiness. The sound echoed, and then the mother woke. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a growl. It was something older than language, a sound that came from the cracked hollows of ribs that had held too much weight too long. The creature heaved forward, rising on shaking limbs, her fur stiff with dust, her breath catching. She saw Marion, and everything in her body tensed. The growl rolled up from her chest, deep and raw, vibrating the stones. She opened her mouth, teeth large and stained, and lifted one arm. Her hand was like a branch torn from the mountain itself, claws jagged and blackened, spread wide as if to strike. Marion didn't run. She sat, right there in the dust, arms at her sides, back straight, eyes soft but unflinching. She didn't raise her voice this time. She didn't beg. Just let the truth leave her mouth like a song meant only for one pair of ears. "I'm not your enemy," she said. "I've lost a child too." The air held still. The creature's arm hung frozen in the air, wavering just above Marion's head. Her breath stuttered, chest expanding and falling in short bursts. Her eyes weren't wild anymore. They were tired, bleeding out something that wasn't blood. Seconds passed like hours. Then the hand dropped. Not in anger, not in surrender, just down, slowly, deliberately. The mother shifted, one knee in the dirt, her great arm pulling back to reveal the two small ones beneath her. She didn't step away. She didn't turn her back, but she opened the space between them, an offering of trust. Marion exhaled, just once, then pulled the thermos from her bag again. This time she didn't fill the baby bottle. She poured directly into the bowl she had brought, sliding it across the ground. It stopped just inches from the mother's fingers. The creature stared at it, then at Marion. And then, inch by inch, she bent her head, lips brushing the edge of the bowl. She drank. It wasn't clean. Water spilled down her chin, ran through the thick tangles of her chest fur, darkening the stone. She drank like a creature being pulled back from the brink by sheer will. Her shoulders quaked. Her eyes closed. When she stopped, she didn't lift her head right away. Marion waited. She didn't move, didn't breathe too hard. The babies, still curled at their mother's side, watched with wide, quiet eyes. One of them reached again toward Marion's hand, not in fear, but with that same primitive trust that all living things are born with, until the world teaches them otherwise. That's when Marion knew. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was inside this moment, and it would cost her something. Later that night, back in the cabin, the air was thicker than before. The heat had burrowed into the walls, the floorboards, her skin. She didn't bother turning on the fan. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, hands resting on her thighs. In front of her sat the old baby bottle, now empty again. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just looked at it. And somewhere in her chest, something soft began to form again. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was close. The third morning came hotter than the last. Not by much. Just enough to make the air feel heavier in Marion's lungs as she climbed. Her boots struck the dust with a dull thud. Each step familiar now. Every bend in the trail already memorized by her body. There was no hesitation. No doubt. Only a rhythm. Her heart, her breath, the distant wind threading through the pine needles like a warning not yet spoken aloud. When she reached the bluff, the shade under the limestone shelf still held. The mother hadn't moved far, but she was stronger today. Marion could see it in the way the creature lifted her head before Marion even stepped into the clearing. Not in fear, in recognition. The babies stirred at her feet, blinking, crawling over one another, reaching toward the bag on Marion's hip like they knew what was inside. One of them let out a low, half-formed sound, more vibration than voice, and Marion smiled without meaning to. She dropped to her knees and uncapped the water, pouring a careful stream into the baby bottle before mixing the powdered formula she'd packed. Her hands moved without needing to think. That old muscle memory. The same motion she'd done 1,000 times years ago in a kitchen filled with music and crayons and sunlight across the linoleum. One of the little ones reached out again, brushing her wrist with a warmth that startled her. The bottle was accepted greedily, both mouths fighting for the nipple. She let them take turns, watching their tiny hands grip the edge, watching them drink like the world hadn't tried to kill them yesterday. Then came the sound that broke everything open. A soft click, metallic, familiar, human. Marion turned sharply and saw the glint of sunlight catch on steel. Sam Hedden, standing 10 yards off, just past the tree line. Hat low, rifle up. His boots crunched against the dry grass as he stepped forward. Eyes wide, mouth drawn tight. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. The gun said everything. Marion stood slowly, placing herself between the creature and the man she'd known half her life. He saw the babies. He saw the mother, and then he saw Marion's hands, empty, open, not afraid, but firm. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice low, rattling. She didn't answer. She didn't move. The mother rose behind her with a growl that shook the dirt. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Sam raised the barrel an inch higher. Marion stepped in front of it. "You shoot her," she said. "You go through me." The air tightened. Sam's grip shifted. His jaw twitched. The mother held her ground, breath heavy, body wounded but ready. Marion stayed still, her chest lifting in calm defiance. "You've lost your mind," Sam said. "I've found it," she whispered. For a moment, the gun didn't waver. Then Sam lowered it, slowly, like gravity had remembered what to do. He exhaled, looked at the babies again, at the mother, at Marion. 48 hours, he said, backing away. She walks on her own by then, or I do what I have to. She didn't thank him. Not with words, just a nod, just enough, just once. He left without another sound. When the wind picked up again, the babies didn't flinch. One of them crawled toward the spot where Sam had stood and let out a small, confused whine. The mother pulled it close, her eyes never leaving Marion's face. That night, Marion sat at her kitchen table with a small bowl of soapy water and the bottle in her hand. She scrubbed it clean, even though it wasn't dirty, even though no one would notice. She wiped the outside with a soft towel, then ran her fingers along the side, feeling the slight indent where her daughter's name had once been written in marker, now faded into memory. The lamp above the table flickered once, then held steady. She reached for a drawer, pulled out a tin box, and opened it slowly. Inside were small things: a faded photo of a girl in a pink dress, a lock of hair in a plastic sleeve, a hospital bracelet still curled into its original shape. She placed the bottle inside and stared for a long time, then closed the lid. The next morning came heavy with stillness. The mother was awake when Marion arrived. sitting upright, one arm draped protectively over her young. Her breathing had improved. The swelling at her side had gone down a little. The wound still looked angry, but not as hopeless. Marion stepped into the space with more confidence now. She spoke softly, telling stories the way one would to children too young to understand, but too human not to listen. She talked about her daughter, about the summer they grew sunflowers in coffee cans, about how she used to hum in her sleep, about how the world never really made sense again after that sound stopped. The mother watched her with eyes that didn't blink often, but when they did, they blinked slow, like the movement itself carried weight. Midday came and went. Marion poured more water, cleaned the edges of the wound with a damp cloth. She used a twig to chase flies away from the babies. She sat with her back to the stone and let the silence stretch between them. The forest didn't feel dangerous. Not here, not anymore. That night, when the sun fell low behind the ridge and turned the sky the color of old blood, Marion stepped outside her cabin and stood barefoot in the dirt. The air smelled of smoke, distant, faint, but unmistakable. She looked west, toward the horizon. The forest was too dry, too quiet. Something was coming. The next morning the smoke had thickened. Ash drifted like soft snow through the trees. The fire was still 2 miles away, but the wind was turning. Marion didn't hesitate. She packed what she could: more water, the small medical kit, a cloth to cover the babies' mouths. She hiked faster this time. When she reached the bluff, the smell was stronger. The babies were coughing, soft, pitiful sounds, and the mother's eyes were rimmed with tears from the smoke. They had to move. Marion took the lead, guiding them along the narrow trail toward a lower ravine where the wind couldn't reach. The mother followed, slow but steady, her body shielding her children at every turn. Halfway down, Marion's foot caught on a loose stone. She slipped. The edge of the trail crumbled beneath her, and for a moment she was falling, the sky spinning, the sound of her breath ripped from her throat. Then, impact, but not with the ground. A hand, massive, calloused, alive. The mother had caught her. One arm wrapped around Marion's torso, the other braced against the rock. She looked up into the creature's face, and time folded, because that grip, that angle, that instant, it was the same as the one she'd dreamed about for years. The same angle she'd reached for her daughter in the car before the world flipped. The same stretch. The same breathless reach. But this time, she didn't let go. The mother pulled her back to solid ground, then turned away, moving to herd the babies deeper into the shadows. Marion stood still, breath shaking, her legs scraped and bleeding, but steady. They made it to the ravine, stayed there until nightfall. The fire passed without reaching them. Just smoke, just warning. That evening, while the forest hissed quietly in the distance, Marion spotted something on a nearby tree. A mark. Not scratches from claws. Not natural. Symbols, lines, a curve, like something carved with meaning. She traced it with her fingers. The bark had been stripped deliberately. When Sam visited that evening, standing at the edge of the clearing, he saw the same mark, and his face changed. "That's not hers," he said, voice tight. "Then whose?" He didn't answer, but Marion noticed the way his hand rested near the gun at his side, even as he said nothing else. She glanced back at the sleeping mother and her babies, curled together in the dirt, their bodies rising and falling in shared rhythm. And in that moment, Marion understood. She wasn't just protecting something fragile. She was standing between two worlds that did not know how to live with each other, and it would not stay quiet for long. The days blurred, not because they were the same, but because they belonged to a different kind of time, a time without clocks or calendars. Only breath, hunger, healing. Marion stopped counting after the 7th sunrise, but later she'd remember it as 21 mornings. The first 3 passed in quiet work. The mother no longer lay like a creature waiting to die. She lifted her head when Marion approached, sniffed the air, watched with a steady calm. The bruise along her ribs was fading from black to brown. The wound was still tender, but cleaner now. Marion had crushed willow bark, boiled pine needles, made poultices like her grandmother once taught her. The forest knew how to heal its own if you listened. Each day, she arrived before the sun cleared the ridge and stayed until the sky turned to ember. She brought warm water in glass jars, pieces of fruit wrapped in wax paper, powdered formula in small brown bottles labeled with dates and measurements, leftovers from old vet kits. She packed them without thinking. Her hands moved like they belonged to someone with a purpose again. By the fourth day, the little ones didn't hesitate anymore. They rushed her when they saw her, all long arms and clumsy feet, cooing sounds that felt more like breath than a language. They reached for her with open palms, tugged on her sleeves, leaned against her legs. One of them had eyes the color of wheat in autumn. The other had a patch of lighter fur across his shoulder that stuck up like a cowlick. They followed her like children who had already forgotten the world without her in it. Marion taught them small things: how to sip without choking, how to hold the bottle steady, how to balance their weight when sitting upright. They learned fast. Their eyes tracked her every movement, their fingers mimicking hers. When she touched her chest, they touched theirs. When she blinked slowly, they blinked back. The mother watched all this with the stillness of old trees. She never interfered, but her gaze followed everything, and slowly something shifted. Not in the babies, not even in Marion, in Sam. At first he'd kept his distance, watching from the trees like a man tracking a bear that hadn't decided if it wanted blood. But on the fifth morning, he stepped closer. His boots crunched in the dead pine needles. His gun stayed slung, but his hand never far from it. He didn't speak until the little ones came near. "They shouldn't be this calm," he muttered. "They know what hurts," Marion said, not turning. "And what doesn't?" He didn't answer, but he stayed longer that day. The next morning, he brought water. He didn't hand it to her directly, just placed the jugs near the path and walked away. 2 days later, he sat down beside her for the first time. "You think they're gonna make it?" "They already are," she said. The forest gave no opinions, but the birds returned that week. Just a few at first. Sparrows, warblers, flying low, cutting through the heat with clipped wings. A fox darted through the underbrush one morning, nose to the wind, then vanished without a sound. The world was beginning to remember what it was like to live, but not everything came back kind. On the 10th day, the air shifted. The wind changed direction, hotter, faster. Marion smelled it before she saw it. Smoke. She climbed to the ridge and saw the line of gray crawling up from the southwest, 2 miles out, maybe less. Not a wall yet, just warning fingers reaching through the dry grass. That night, the coughing started, soft at first. Short bursts from the smallest one. Then the other joined in. The smoke had found them. Marion didn't wait. She packed the medical kit, a wet cloth for each of them, a blanket soaked in cold water. She wrapped the babies and led the mother downhill, away from the bluff, into the lower ravines where the air moved slower. The mother hesitated at the edge of the trail, muscles twitching, her instincts pulling her in both directions. Stay and protect, or move and survive. But she followed. She always followed Marion now. The cave they found was shallow but cool. A bend in the stone shaped like a hollow mouth, big enough for 4 bodies, just deep enough to breathe in peace. The mother curled around her young. Marion sat at the entrance, holding a branch in one hand like it meant something. The smoke stayed high that night. The fire passed to the west. Only its echo reached them. The scent of ash, the hiss of burned leaves, the silence that came after something had almost happened. In the morning, the sky was stained. Gray, not from cloud, but from memory. Marion returned to the bluff with the mother trailing close behind. Both babies nestled on her back, gripping her fur with quiet strength. She moved easier now, still limping, still scarred, but upright. Sam saw them from a distance and didn't move. He waited until Marion walked past him, then said without looking, "Didn't think she'd get up." "She did. She did." That was all. The mother returned to her spot beneath the limestone ledge and lay down with the slow, careful motion of something remembering how. The babies tumbled over her, chattering, fighting for space. Marion sat nearby, opened her bag, and reached for the apples she'd sliced that morning, but stopped. There was something on the tree, a mark. Not claw, not weather, carved. Clean lines, notched edges, a triangle nested inside a circle, just above eye level, hidden behind the bark's natural lines. It hadn't been there before. Marion stood slowly. She traced the edge with her finger. The bark flaked off, fresh, too fresh. Sam saw it too. He walked over, chewing his bottom lip like a man chewing through every bad thought he'd ever had. That's not natural. No. You know what it means? No. But her gut did. It wasn't a warning. It was a message. Not to her. To someone, or something else. That night sleep came late. Marion lay in bed with the windows open. The forest creaked like old floorboards. She listened for owls, for coyotes, for silence. She heard none, only wind, and the soft hum of something ancient moving beneath it all. By the 18th morning, the mother had begun to meet Marion halfway, not just physically, but with her eyes, with small gestures, a tilt of the head, a sound in her throat. Once, she reached out and touched Marion's forearm, just once, and left her hand there. It was neither trust nor approval. It was something older, recognition. They had both outlived something they hadn't meant to, and neither could carry it alone anymore. The babies grew louder, braver. They played now, rolled in the dirt, climbed on rocks. One of them brought Marion a pine cone, dropped it in her lap like a gift, then stared until she said, "Thank you." She did. Thank you. On the 21st morning, the forest held its breath. Sam didn't come that day. The sky was too still, the breeze too quiet, and Marion felt something inside her shift again. It wasn't dread. It wasn't fear. It was the knowing that this chapter, this soft, impossible sliver of borrowed time, was almost over, and something was coming to claim what followed. The forest changed the night before it happened. Marion didn't know why she woke. Maybe it was the way the wind stopped breathing, or the way the trees outside her cabin held their limbs too still. She sat up in the dark, listening. No birds, no insects, just the sound of her own breath and the distant creak of wood expanding in dry heat. She didn't sleep again that night. By dawn, the trail to the bluff felt colder, even though the air was hotter. The silence pressed against her ears, a kind of weight that made her feel like she was underwater. The birds that usually greeted the sunrise were gone. Even the flies had vanished. She reached the limestone shelf with her skin already prickling. The mother was awake. She stood tall now, full height, the babies at her feet. Her shoulders were squared, her posture alert, the fur along her neck slightly raised. Her head tilted as if she'd heard something coming from behind the ridge. Marion didn't speak. She crouched slowly, placing the cloth-wrapped bundle of food and water down like an offering. The little ones didn't rush her like usual. They stayed close to their mother, watching the trees. Then the forest held its breath. At first, it was just a shape. Too large to be elk, too fluid to be bear. It stepped out from the shadows with a slow, deliberate gait. 9 feet tall if it was an inch, broader than any man. Built like it had been carved from the same stone that lined the cliffs. Its fur was darker than the mother's, deep ash black, and shimmered with sweat and dust. Its face was hard to see in full light, shadowed by the angle of the rising sun. But the eyes were wrong, too sharp. Focused not on the children, not on the wound still healing across the mother's ribs, but on Marion. It didn't charge, it circled, moving with the caution of something ancient and territorial. Each step left a deeper mark in the dry ground than the last. It passed close to Marion, close enough for her to smell it. Earth, blood, smoke, the scent of something that had lived long enough to stop fearing death. The mother stepped between them. Her roar wasn't loud, but it was final. A command, a warning, a challenge. The larger creature didn't back away. It tilted its head, made a low rumble in its chest that sounded like a growl trying to remember language. It looked at the mother the way a judge looks at someone who broke a sacred law. It wasn't here for the children. It wasn't even here for territory. It was here because the mother had let Marion live. The babies huddled behind their mother, eyes darting, making small chirping noises of confusion. One of them reached for Marion's hand without looking, and she caught it, pulled it gently to her chest. The black one noticed. Its head snapped in their direction, shoulders tightened, jaw clenched. It didn't understand. Or maybe it did, and that was worse. It stepped forward. The mother roared again, louder this time, and blocked its path fully. She widened her stance, placed one hand back toward her children, the other ready to strike. The two of them stood like statues of a language no one remembered. The babies whimpered. Then the world cracked open. A deep rumble rolled through the cliffside. Marion felt it in the soles of her feet first, then in her teeth. The ground trembled. A high echo cracked from above, sharp and sudden. Something broke loose from the bluff's upper edge. A slab of rock, wide as a pickup, came loose and crashed downward in slow, dreadful silence. Marion didn't move fast enough. She heard the scream, but it wasn't hers. It was the mother's. The black creature jumped back, but the mother didn't. She lunged forward, not toward the danger, toward Marion, toward the babies. She turned her body sideways and threw her shoulder into the rock fall just before it struck. The sound was sickening. Bone-meeting stone. Dust exploded upward in a choking cloud. When it cleared, Marion was on the ground, arms wrapped around the two little ones. The mother lay on her side, one arm still outstretched toward them. Breathing, but barely. The black creature didn't come closer. It stood just outside the clearing, chest heaving, eyes wild with something that might have been rage, or confusion, or shame. It looked at Marion again, then at the fallen mother, and then, with a sound that rose from its throat like a broken horn, it turned and walked back into the trees. It didn't run. It didn't look back. But before it vanished fully into the tree line, it stopped at a wide pine and dug its teeth into the bark. A single, deliberate bite. Then it was gone. The mark it left behind dripped sap like blood. Marion didn't chase it. She didn't even stand. She crawled to the mother's side. Her shoulder was crushed. The same one that had pulled Marion from the cliff weeks earlier. But she was alive, eyes fluttering, breath ragged, muscles trembling with effort. Marion didn't cry. She whispered something so soft it barely escaped her throat. "Thank you." She didn't know if the mother heard her. The babies curled into their mother's side. One of them reached out and took Marion's hand again, held it, didn't let go. The sun rose higher. The wind returned, gently this time. Somewhere far off, an owl called in broad daylight. Sam arrived just before noon. He saw the destruction, the skid of stone across dirt, the mark in the tree. He walked slow. His rifle stayed down. "What happened?" Marion didn't answer right away. She stood, brushing the dust from her jeans, then pointed to the pine tree. Sam stared at the bite mark. "Is that what I think it is?" "I think there's more than one kind of law out here," she said. Sam didn't argue. He didn't need to. The wind did that for him. That night, Marion sat by her cabin window with the lights off. The forest outside was loud again. Bugs, birds, distant howls. The world had returned to its routine, but she hadn't. She kept thinking of that sound, the crack, the impact, the choice. The mother could have saved herself. She didn't. She chose the children. She chose Marion. And that changed everything. Not just what Marion believed, but what she owed. Because now it wasn't about helping something survive. It was about protecting something that had proven it could love. She didn't know what the black one would do next, but she felt it in her chest like a storm still out at sea. It would come again, and next time, it wouldn't just bite the tree. By morning, the silence didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like something hiding. The mother had not returned by the time the sky began to lighten over the bluff. The two little ones were alone, curled into each other where the dirt still held a trace of their mother's scent. They were restless, chirping low, shifting, sniffing the air in anxious pulses like their instincts knew what Marion couldn't yet see. She searched the ridge first, then the tree line, then farther, past the cairn they'd built for the dead fox, past the bent cedar where the younger one once tried to climb and tumbled off like a ball of fur. No sign, no blood, but tracks, fresh ones, leading into the deeper brush where the air grew tighter and the light dimmed even under a cloudless sky. The tracks weren't dragging like before. They were purposeful, heavy. She followed. There was no thinking to it, only the pull of it. Somewhere just shy of a quarter-mile from the bluff, in a patch of overgrowth half lit by a break in the trees, Marion stopped. There she was, the mother, alive, standing, blood on her mouth, and at her feet, a body. A deer, young, still warm, neck broken, not torn, not savaged, killed. Cleanly, delivered. Marion didn't speak. She only took a single step forward, enough for the leaves to rustle. The mother turned. Her face was alert, but not aggressive. Her chest heaved, not from threat, but from effort. Her wound still raw under the left rib pulsed with each breath, but her hands were steady. Her eyes locked onto Marion's. Then she stepped back, just once, just enough to create space between herself and the kill. And that's when Marion understood. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a trophy. It was a gift. The deer lay with one leg bent at an angle that didn't belong. Its eyes were still open, but the steam of its life had not yet fully left its skin. A fresh kill. For her. The mother had gone out in pain, in smoke, in silence, and come back with a gift, a gesture that couldn't be misunderstood. Marion dropped to one knee. She didn't touch the deer, not right away. She only bowed her head. Not a lot, not theatrical, but low enough to show something ancient that didn't need words. Thank you. The mother watched, still, breathing. Then she turned and walked back toward the bluff. Marion followed behind her in silence, a step behind. The little ones chirped and ran to her when they saw her coming through the trees, clinging to her legs, crawling up her side as she knelt. She let them. Her massive arms gathered them without hesitation, and she held them there for a long moment. And then she looked back at Marion, and waited. Marion approached slowly, sat across from them, reached into her pack and pulled out a cloth-wrapped piece of jerky, part of her rations, and placed it in the space between them. The mother didn't move, but the smaller baby crawled forward, took it, ate without fear. That was the first time they shared a meal. Later that afternoon, Sam came up the trail with his radio slung on one side and a cooler on the other. He wasn't smiling. He didn't speak as he set the cooler down and opened the lid. Inside, ice, venison, a jug of water. He stood beside her, squinting. Fire jumped the canyon last night. How far? 6 miles southeast. The wind's pushing west, but if it shifts... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They both looked out across the trees. The smoke was low today, but the smell was always there now. Under the bark, under the leaves, in the skin, like something waiting to rewrite the map. Did she hunt? Sam asked. She did. You see it? Marion nodded. He took off his hat, scratched the back of his neck. I'll be damned. But he didn't sound angry, just tired. Before he left, he walked past the pine tree where the bite mark from the dark male still glistened with old sap. He paused there, touched the wound in the bark. I don't think he's gone. He's not, Marion said. You think he saw the kill? Maybe. You think he'll try to take it? Marion looked back at the mother, now napping with her babies, one arm curled around both, the wound on her side stitched with scab and soot. She'd die before she let him. Sam didn't argue, just nodded once and walked back into the woods. That night, Marion stayed longer than she ever had. The fireflies came out early. The cicadas hadn't returned. The forest still felt off. But the air had softened. The tension, not gone, but thinner. She sat near the edge of the clearing, legs crossed, the smell of deer blood still faint on her boots. The moon came late and thin. She was about to stand when the sound came again, branches cracking. Heavy. Wrong. She turned fast. The dark figure emerged from the west, same as before. taller than memory, slower than last time. His shoulders hunched now, breathing louder, thicker. His steps more forceful, like each one was an accusation. The babies squealed and ran to their mother, burying themselves beneath her arms. Marion stood, hands out. No weapon, just her. The mother rose. She didn't wait. She stepped between the creature and her young with a guttural sound that made the birds fly from the trees. The black male didn't answer. He charged, not at her, at the kill. The deer. He lunged toward the carcass, dragging it several feet before the mother slammed into him with a force that echoed across the clearing. They collided like titans. Marion backed away, heart hammering, unsure where to move. The baby screamed. The sound of their fight was more than physical. It was breath, bone, warning. Then came the moment. The black male pinned the mother down, hand at her throat, teeth bared. And Marion moved, without thinking. She grabbed the torch she'd kept near the bluff, a branch she used to light the path when smoke made it too hard to see. She lit it with the flare Sam had given her, struck it once, twice. It caught. The flame leapt up in a burst of heat and light. She ran toward the creatures, two gods fighting over old rules, and stood between them. She held the torch high, its light flickering across the stunned black face of the male. His eyes locked onto hers. She did not speak. She didn't have to. The flame danced in her hand like judgment. He blinked, snorted, and let go. The mother coughed, rolled away, pulled her children back toward her chest. The black one stared, then slammed his fist into the ground and turned. He vanished into the trees without sound. But this time, he didn't bite the bark. He didn't mark his rage. He left it, and that was worse. Later, Marion sat shaking beside the sleeping family, the torch still burning low, her breath uneven. The babies had fallen asleep clutching each other. The mother curled her arms around them, her body shielding theirs once again. And for the first time, Marion allowed herself to lean forward. She placed one hand on the ground, and the other, lightly, on the mother's shoulder. The heat beneath her skin was real, the trust there earned. And Marion knew. She had crossed a line. There was no going back to being an outsider. She had entered something ancient, and now she had to carry it forward. It happened on the 87th day. Not the day it was hottest, but the day the wind changed. The morning began like the others had. Dry, golden, silent. Marion rose before the sun cracked the ridge. Her body ached more than usual. The stiffness in her knees no longer left after a cup of coffee. She didn't complain. The pain felt honest. It reminded her she was still moving forward, even if the world around her had stopped. The path up to the bluff felt longer. The trees seemed thinner. Dust clung to every surface like it had made a home there. The pine needles no longer smelled sweet. They smelled like they'd given up. When she reached the clearing, the light was sharp, cutting sideways through the trunks, catching on every leaf like a warning. The mother sat near the ledge, the babies pressed close into her side. She wasn't sleeping. She was waiting. Marion didn't speak. She only approached, lowered herself slowly beside them, and let her body settle into the space like it belonged there now. It was the mother who looked up first. Eyes tilted toward the horizon, Marion followed her gaze. The clouds had gathered without her noticing. Thick, slow, moving wrong. Like they'd built in the distance days ago but hadn't been brave enough to show their faces until now. The wind shifted. From the east. Then again from the north. Then both. It wasn't natural. She could smell the change in it. Like the first second you realize a door's been left open in a storm. One of the babies sneezed. The other coughed once. The mother wrapped her arms tighter, nostrils flaring. Marion stood. Sam had told her a storm might come if the heat held another week. No one thought the sky had anything left in it. They were wrong. The first drop hit just before noon. She heard it before she felt it. A high, distant pop, like a knuckle cracking in heaven. Then came another. Then 3. Then the sky split. Not like an apology, like a reckoning. Rain fell in sheets. Sudden, vicious, cleansing. The ground, starved for moisture, drank too fast. Dust turned to sludge. Leaves danced like they'd been waiting their whole lives to remember what it meant to move. The mother blinked up into it, mouth slightly open. She didn't flinch. She didn't shelter. She let it fall across her face, over the healed wound on her ribs, into the fur still marked with dried blood. The babies squealed with joy, real joy. They tumbled out from under her arms flailing, heads thrown back. They danced in it. If dancing was a thing creatures like that ever learned. But it was dancing, pure wild movement. No fear, no hunger, just release. Marion stood still. She wanted to laugh. She didn't. She just cried. Quiet beneath the rain, where no one had to hear. For everything that had died. And everything that hadn't. For the chance to start again. The mother rose to her feet. Tall, proud, more whole than Marion had ever seen her. She took one step toward her children. Then another. Then stopped. And turned to Marion. Not for instruction. Not for thanks. Just to look. To acknowledge. And that's when Marion knew. It was time. Not because they wanted to leave. Because they had to. Because if she kept giving them her presence, her rhythm, her food, her voice, they'd never go back to the forest's language. They'd never relearn the old ways. They'd look for bottles instead of berries, for human hands instead of instinct. She had to disappear from their story, so theirs could begin again. The moment cracked open like the storm above. She took off her pack, laid it on the ground, unzipped it slowly, carefully, took out the bottles, the cloth, the food, everything that had connected her to them, and left it there. She stepped back, empty-handed. She looked at the babies. Their eyes followed her, confused. One of them whined. The other took a step forward. Marion dropped to her knees, held her arms wide. They ran to her, threw themselves into her lap. Cried, but not in pain, not in hunger. In knowing, they clung to her. Small hands wrapped around her shirt. One tucked its face into her collarbone. Marion pressed her forehead to their fur. She whispered something only they could hear. Then slowly she let them go. The mother had waited, still, patient, watching. She didn't come forward until the babies had stepped back. She approached Marion. Close! So close that Marion could see the tiny flecks of moss caught in the fur near her neck. Could see the faint scar where the rock had struck her shoulder weeks ago. Could see the rain clinging to her lashes like stars. They looked at each other. No barrier now. Just two beings who had carried death and come out the other side still willing to give. The mother blinked, lowered her head. Once. Not fast, not dramatic, but deep, intentional. It was not gratitude. It was recognition of what had been given, of what had been risked, of what had been made whole again. Marion did something then she hadn't done since the accident. She raised her hand and placed it gently, just for a second, on the mother's brow. The fur was coarse, damp, warm underneath, and beneath that warmth, a pulse. Alive. She pulled her hand back. The mother turned, made a sound, low, resonant, not quite mournful. A sound that called her children. They obeyed. Quickly, without pause. They didn't look back until the trees swallowed them, all but the smallest one. That one turned at the edge of the clearing, raised one hand, then followed. Marion stood there. No umbrella, no pack, no shelter. Just her, soaked to the skin, mouth open. Crying, but not breaking. Not this time. Because the silence that followed didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like space, like breath, like a space made sacred by what it had held. She stayed until the rain slowed, until the storm moved west, until the sun broke through in streaks, rays through shattered cloud. Then she sat down in the mud and laughed. She laughed like she hadn't in a decade. Not out of joy, but out of the unspoken truth that somehow this had been the point of her surviving. Not to keep breathing, but to help something else keep going, and to finally lay something down. When she walked back to her cabin, she didn't take the path. She moved through the trees like she knew them again, felt the bark beneath her fingertips, heard her daughter's voice in the wind. Not in pain, just in memory, like a note played once and still hanging in the air. By the time she reached the porch, the clouds were gone. The light was gold, and the forest, for the first time in nearly 3 months, had exhaled. 2 years passed like mist over water. Not fast, not sudden. Just slowly enough that she didn't notice at first where time had gone. Marion lived quieter now, not in the way people do when they give up, but in the way people live after they've finally laid something down. She'd return to work at the town library 4 days a week. The hours were short, the pay the same, but she liked the sound of pages turning. She liked the slow routine of reshelving dog-eared mysteries and helping school kids find books about wolves or stars. She liked hearing laughter again, even if it wasn't her own. She still lived in the same cabin, windows now fixed, porch sanded and stained, bird feeders hanging from rusted hooks. In the evenings, she tended a garden that hadn't grown since the drought. Now the tomatoes came in fat and defiant. The sunflowers leaned over the railing like nosy neighbors. The wind didn't carry smoke anymore, just pine. She'd started going to the Sunday potlucks again. People noticed, but no one asked, because the way she carried herself, upright, steady, soft-spoken but clear, told them there had been a chapter in her life that didn't belong to anyone else. They respected that. She never spoke of the bluff. Never told Sam, even when he asked carefully over coffee if she'd seen them again. She hadn't. Not until that day. It was mid-October. Leaves were just turning along the ridge. Not yet amber. Not yet red. The kind of color that warned you winter was sharpening its teeth behind the hills. Marion was out on a volunteer trail check, a thing she did now and then when the ranger station needed another set of eyes. Mostly, it was a reason to be outside. To walk paths she once feared, to remember the feel of wilderness without waiting for pain to find her there. Her boots kicked through a carpet of dry needles. Her breath came slow and even. She carried nothing but a field notebook, a water bottle, and a scarf tied around her neck that used to belong to her daughter. The ridge she climbed faced west, a long slope of limestone and scattered boulders overlooking the valley. From the top, you could see all the way to where the trees grew thick and dark, where maps grew vague and people stopped naming things. She scanned the horizon like she always did, and then she saw them. 3 shapes, still, distant, but unmistakable. She stopped walking, didn't blink. They were standing in a clearing down near the base of the valley. The largest one, taller now, broader across the back, moved first. It stepped slowly around a rise, scenting the air. Hunting. The second moved beside it, just smaller but fast, agile. Then the third, lowest to the ground, furred in a pattern she remembered like a scar. 2 years older, but still them, the family, alive, moving as one. The breath left her before she meant it to. Not a gasp, just a breaking open of something that had stayed locked too long. She didn't speak, didn't wave, just watched. She thought they wouldn't notice her, that the wind would carry her scent the wrong direction. But the mother, older now, thicker around the shoulders, with a presence that had only deepened, turned, and saw her. Their eyes met across what must have been 3, maybe 400 yards of open distance. No sound passed between them, no signal, no tension. The others paused when she paused. The youngest twitched, then waited. The mother held her gaze and did not bow. Not this time. She did something smaller, something quieter. She tilted her head, just slightly, as if to say, I see you. I remember. I'm not afraid anymore. And then she turned away, walked on. The others followed. No rush, no fear, just movement. Purposeful. Marion stood frozen long after the clearing was empty. Not because she couldn't move, but because she didn't need to. Because that single glance, that almost nod, had been enough. More than enough. It was the end of a chapter and the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. She pressed a hand to her chest. Not dramatically, just a quiet confirmation that her heart was still there. Still full. Still hers. And for the first time in 2 years, and maybe a decade before that, she realized it didn't hurt to carry it. Not anymore. It was the weight of something returned, not taken. When she reached the bottom of the ridge and stepped back onto the gravel path, the sky above her had gone pale with late afternoon light. The wind carried the scent of moss and wood smoke. Somewhere a hawk cried overhead, slicing through the silence like a song with no words. She didn't look back, not because she wanted to forget, but because she'd finally been given permission to move forward. That night, she sat on her porch in a wooden rocking chair she'd rebuilt from salvaged fence posts and watched the stars come out one by one. The forest was black beyond the tree line, but it no longer felt like it was holding secrets. It felt like it was keeping something safe. She smiled, not a half smile, not the polite kind she gave strangers at the feed store. A full one, wide across the face, bright, private, because she knew she hadn't just saved a life that summer. She'd gotten one back. The one she thought she buried in a coffin the size of a child's bed. The one she thought died the day a voice cried out in a storm, and no one could reach her in time. That girl was gone, but something had come back in her place. Something older, wilder, kinder, and it had teeth when it needed them. She stood, stretched, walked inside, turned off the lights. The forest outside exhaled again. And somewhere, in a clearing no one had ever mapped, a mother moved through the dark with her children beside her, and for the first time in generations, she did so knowing that someone out there had chosen mercy over fear. And it had changed everything. Sometimes, life doesn't hand us redemption in loud ways. It doesn't come wrapped in applause or wrapped up neatly with answers. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the breath between grief and grace, in the long pause where a broken world offers you one more chance to be kind, even when no one is looking, especially when no one is looking. And maybe that's all mercy ever really is. Not a grand rescue, but a quiet choice. To kneel when you could run, to reach out when you've been hurt, to open your hand instead of clenching your fist. Because somewhere deep in the marrow of who we are, we remember that we're not so different from the wild things we fear. We carry our woundedness. We guard our young. We lash out when cornered. And yet, we also love, protect, and sometimes, against all odds, we forgive. There are moments when we are offered the chance to stand in the space between two worlds, to listen instead of label, to protect what we don't fully understand, to let go of control and still show up with our full heart. And in doing so, something inside us softens, just enough to let the light back in. This story wasn't about taming what's wild. It was about remembering that the wild was never the enemy. It was about choosing to be human in the way that matters most, not through dominance or survival, but through tenderness, sacrifice, and seeing beyond ourselves. It was about healing, not just in the body, but in the places grief left hollow. It was about becoming brave enough to love again, knowing full well what loss once felt like. We live in a world aching for gentleness, where fear is loud and empathy too often feels like a whisper. But when one person chooses compassion, when one soul says, "I see you, and I will not turn away," that choice echoes through generations, through stories, through the woods we walk and the lives we touch without even realizing it. And so maybe the real legacy we leave behind is kindness, unseen but not unfelt, small but never wasted. Thank you truly for spending time with this story. If it moved something in you, if it reminded you of what really matters, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your voice. And if you believe there's still room in this world for stories like this, stories about connection, courage, and the quiet power of compassion, please consider subscribing and joining our growing community. Every voice here makes the circle stronger. Until the next story finds you, stay wild, stay kind, and take care of each other.